When she bent down and said to me, as I was in a wheelchair, I just was so weak, just from losing Grace, emotionally just a wreck. She just said, "Mrs. Schara, I just want you to know that myself and several other nurses don't believe Grace should have died tonight." And when she said that, it was a red flag that something went wrong. Something was not right here. I had this gut feeling that something was done to Grace that wasn't supposed to be done.
Throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen everything from the censoring of world-class doctors to the suppression of potentially life-saving treatments. Doctors in the tens of thousands around the world have been raising awareness about this, including pointing out the potential dangers with government-sanctioned treatment protocols and offering potentially life-saving treatment protocols of their own. These doctors have been heavily ridiculed simply for trying to help. So we got to ask, where has all of this led? Well, many families were unable to see their loved ones during their last days. Families were unable to get doctors to open up to treatment protocols that could have potentially saved their loved ones' lives. Perhaps this has even led to stories like Grace Schara's, a 19-year-old girl who was full of life, yet lost too soon.
Tuesdays we had horse riding, and Wednesdays we had dance, and Thursdays we had our homeschool choir and violin lesson. Horse riding was just one of her favorite things that she did. And so when we lost her, everything just came to a halt. And our days are just, they'll never be the same, because she just was such a part of every day of our life. There was just always smiles and giggles in the house. She just, she brought light to life.
Yes, September 28th is when Grace got COVID, and because she had a sniffle that day, and our attitude was no problem. We just assumed if any one of the three of us got a sniffle, we're going to assume it's COVID and go right to ivermectin. Grace was already on a vitamin protocol, and we just never thought anything of it. So we got her started on ivermectin right away, and ultimately, then from September 28th to October 1st, we had a wedding to go to on October 1st, and so we tested her with a home test. So she was well enough to go to the wedding, but we just thought if she does have COVID, we better make sure that we're not spreading it. So we tested her, she was tested positive. Again, no biggie. Then on October 6th, she was not able to maintain her oxygen saturation above 90. She was in the high 80s, and unfortunately, we perceived that as an emergency. And so we took her to urgent care, and they did a blood draw and saw she had a high D dimer, which is shows the propensity to clot. They said you should go to the emergency room. So Grace and I took an ambulance ride to the emergency room. They did a CT scan to check for clots, and it was negative. The emergency room physician suggested, I think we should admit Grace and keep her for 3-4 days, get her on oxygen, a steroid, and she'll be good to go. And of course, if I would have known then what I know now, we would have never admitted her. The next day was October 10th. At 8 o'clock in the morning, a doctor came in and said, "You're going to need to put your daughter on a ventilator in the next 2 hours." And I said, "What is that based on?" He said, "Well, we did a blood gas draw last night, and the numbers show Grace needs a ventilator." So I said, "Well, what time did you do the blood gas draw?" And he said, "About 11:30. I said, "Well, I don't think that number is accurate." I said, I was working with the nurses with Grace for about 2 hours to get her BiPAP mask situated, and her blood pressure was 235 over 135, and her heart was racing at 150 beats a minute. So I don't believe the number. I think you got to retake it. So they did, and Grace was fine. So then I asked him, if we put Grace on a ventilator, what's the prognosis? And he said only 20% of people walk out alive once they're on a ventilator. So I got educated on ventilators pretty quick. I talked with Dr. Sue. There was an attending nurse. She started crying. I said, what's going on? She had a daughter named Grace, and she knew if I decided that Grace was going to die. And so I did some research, found out the real number is about only 15% walk out alive, and most of those die in the first year because of the damage done by a ventilator. And a ventilator is a kiss of death with COVID. It should not be used. So we dodged the ventilator bullet at that point, but that did not stop them. Grace was never vented. And it's because we got wise to ventilators, but that they requested that we give them a pre-authorization for a ventilator 4 times subsequent to that event. And it was in the context that they said, just in case. Well, just in case is when they decide. So the next day was October 9th. Grace got up. She's hungry. She tries telling me she's hungry. She can't communicate through that BiPAP mask, so she starts signing. She's so darn cute. And so I order food, start feeding her. The nurse comes running in and says, "You can't do that." I said, "What's the reason?" And she said, "Well, because Grace's oxygen saturation is only at 85%. And I start thinking about this. I thought, that cannot be. 2 days ago, she was at 95% on a regular cannula. Now she's got this BiPAP mask on. There's no way she can be at 85%. So I had all my COVID materials in the room, which included my own oxygen saturation meter, because I suspected I was going to get COVID while I was in the room with Grace, which I did. I got COVID on October 7th. Anyway, so now this is October 9th, so I put the oxygen saturation meter on Grace's finger, and it reads 95%. So I called the nurse in and I asked her, I said, "Is my meter accurate?" And she said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Well, why is my $50 meter reading 95% and your $50,000 machine is reading 85%? And she said, "The leads get sweaty." I said, "Well, if you know that, why don't you proactively change the leads out or whatever it takes so that you have an accurate reading, given that this is the primary statistic you're using to manage my daughter's care?" And she snottily responded, "You should just be thankful you caught this." And I thought, oh my gosh, this is strange. So now we get to October 10th, and that's a Sunday, 7 o'clock in the morning. The head nurse came in with an armed guard and said, "You need to leave immediately." And I said, "What is that based on?" And she said, "Number one, the last 3 shifts of nurses don't want you in the room." And of course, I'm giving you kind of the high points, but you can see why. I was challenging the care. So, they don't want challenges. So, the first night they compliment me because I'm helping them, but as I'm starting to connect the dots and I'm challenging everything, they didn't like that. Number 2, you've been shutting off the alarms at night. So I said, "Well, the nurses trained me." I said, "They showed me how to shut off the non-essential alarms because they're going off constantly. And oftentimes it's 20 minutes plus before they come in the room." And then third, she says, "We suspect you have COVID." It's so stupid to hear the third one because they're the ones who told me I'm going to get COVID. So she's got the armed guard right there. And she said, "Well, if you don't leave now, we're going to call the Upton Police Department." I called an attorney who's a friend of mine, and he recommended leaving peacefully. That day is definitely the hardest day of my life, and it's because it's the last time I saw Grace physically alive. I gave her a big hug, and I looked in her eyes, and she was sad, and I was sad. And I remember that picture of her. It's burned into my mind. So the armed guard walked me out to the truck. He said, he watched all this, and he knew what was going on. He said, "Scott, you need to take this to a higher level."
After Grace's father was removed from the hospital, doctors began increasing the amount of drugs they were giving to Grace while no one was there to advocate for her. 44 hours passed as the family worked with their attorneys to have Grace's sister, Jess, be her new advocate while in the hospital. We spoke with a nurse practitioner named Sue, who wishes to remain anonymous. She reviewed Grace's medical records, and here she breaks down the drug stack that was given to Grace leading up to her death.
So the first one that they were giving is the one called Precedex, and that's the one that they use for anesthesia. The indications to use that medication is either if they're trying to sedate somebody in an intensive care setting, like I mentioned, somebody that would be on a ventilator, for example, or if they're trying to put them under anesthesia for a procedure or a surgery. And so, that's appropriate use. If somebody's being sedated just because they're in a bed and they're using it as a chemical restraint, ethically, that's already questionable. However, if they chose to use it, and they did, it's very clear on the package insert, which is how, the directions we are to follow as healthcare providers as to how to administer medication. It's very clear that that medication is not to be used for more than 24 hours continuously. And as you see with Precedex, they were using it for much longer than 24 hours. On the 13th, which was Grace's last day, they started at that 0.7 and then started edging it up and went to 0.8, 0.9, 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.4, and that's where it ended. So they really did bump up that dose, and that's anesthetic. So then, when we look at that last day, they also added lorazepam, which is the Ativan, which is typically used for anxiety, but can be used for prolonged seizures, for example. It can be a pre-anesthetic, so you don't remember what was happening during a procedure. They gave a dose of that at 11:25 in the morning, and they gave it IV 0.5 IV push. Then they gave a dose at 5:46 in the evening, and then that was 0.5, and then they gave another dose of 0.5 at 5:49, 3 minutes later. That was ordered to be given at 0.5 milligrams as needed every 6 hours. So that second dose 3 minutes later was not even following orders. And they wrote a note in there that they overrode that order because her respiratory rate was 55. And they overrode that order because of the work of breathing that she was having. But if we go back to looking at the Precedex is an anesthetic. It decreases your ability to breathe. It decreases the ability to get oxygen into the lungs. So the natural outcome of being on a sedative is you're going to breathe faster and work harder to breathe. So now they're giving lorazepam to overcome what's being done by the Precedex. And then, the final push there was they gave the 2 milligrams of morphine IV push at 6:15 p.m. So that was less than a half an hour after the second dose of lorazepam. All of those work in combination with each other to suppress their ability to breathe in a person that was in there for acute respiratory illness. And they work to suppress the ability of the heart to pump. So when these are used in combination like that, they have a cumulative effect. And you're supposed to have something by the bedside to reverse that action if someone would have their heart start to stop or their respiration start to cease. In my professional opinion, nobody could look at that chart and see something different. We all understand that these things are cumulative. We all understand that you're supposed to lower doses. We all understand that prolonged use of this and short, periods of time of use of this would be cumulative, would be at high risk for respiratory depression and cardiac arrest.
I was always holding and touching Grace. I said, she doesn't feel right to me. Can you let me know, does she feel cold to you? And this blood taker lady said, no, she feels fine. And, I'm not really thinking much of it. I just continue on with the night, and I'm reading cards that we got from people, friends and families, get well cards, and just keep reading to Grace, and just something didn't seem right yet. She felt cold. And I can't remember what the monitors were saying at this time, but they were fluctuating, so I wasn't really focusing on the monitors too much. She didn't feel right. So I went out and peeked my head out the door, and I asked Holly to get a temperature on Grace. I said, she doesn't feel right, she feels cold. And she never came in to take a temperature. She said, you could cover her with a blanket. And I asked, I said, is this normal with what you did? She said, yeah, this is normal. And so I went back and I covered Grace with the blanket. And just to go back a little, I did question too, because they told me after they were going to do the morphine that they were going to also take her off her anxiety med at the same time, which was Precedex. Again, I was being told that it was an anxiety med. So I questioned them. Is that okay to give her 1, morphine, and 2, to give her morphine and stop the Precedex? Because, you know, I had some knowledge that you don't want to stop a med and do another med and combine them, and they told me, yeah, that was fine. So I cover Grace with a blanket, and I go on to continue to read our get well cards and just talking to Grace, and she still did not feel right to me. I just didn't feel, something felt off. And so I look at the monitors and everything's dropping. I look for a pulse. I can't find a pulse now. I take her eyelid and I lift her eyelid back, and her eyes are rolling back into her head. And I go out and I try to get help again. I go to Holly and I said, I need you to come look at her. Something's not right. She's not with us anymore. There's no pulse. And Holly tells me, we did everything we could for your sister. No one came in that room. So this is when I got my parents on FaceTime, thinking that these could be the final moments. I don't know what to do. So I got them on the phone. I let them know that her numbers are dropping. What do I do? And they said to get a nurse in there. I said, I've been trying. They won't help me. He said, go try again. So I went out and I'm in the hallway now, and I'm trying. I'm asking them to come help her, save her, do something. And they holler back that she's DNR, do not resuscitate. And a nurse reads off the computer screen. And I do not remember her typing a damn thing. Excuse my language. She had it ready to go on the computer and said that the doctor labeled Grace DNR and we can't do anything about it.
The first thing is the patient or the patient power of attorney requests a DNR. That's the first state statute. So did Grace request a DNR? No. Did Cindy request a DNR? No. I mean, we have to request it first. Then the doctor is supposed to explain the DNR to us in detail. Okay, did that happen? No. Why would it happen? Because we didn't request it. Then you can't make this stuff up. Then the thing which would be, everybody would intuitively know, you're supposed to sign the DNR. So Cindy was supposed to sign the DNR. Okay, so unless she ran in that morning to sign it, there's no DNR signed. Of course she wouldn't sign the DNR, just process it. They tell us how great of a day Grace had the day before. We should put a feeding tube in. Why would we be thinking about a DNR if we're gonna put a feeding tube in? It doesn't make any sense. So this medical malpractice nurse who Tom Renz got for us, she told me that there was at least 1,000 pages missing. So we thought we had all the records. She said, there's at least 1,000 pages missing. So then I said, well, how do we get the other 1,000 pages? So she wrote up this request. I sent in another request, and sure as she said it, 948 pages show up. So now she goes through the 948 pages, and on page 853 of the 948 pages, it shows that Gavin Shokar put the DNR on Grace. It says ordered by the doctor, no code, at 10:56 in the morning on Grace's last day. If you look at the timeline shows that Grace was maxed out on Precedex at 10:48, 8 minutes earlier. So what's the reason? One of the attorneys who looked at this said he thinks they put the DNR on Grace because they thought the max dose Precedex was going to take her out, and they had to cover their rear end.
And so we're screaming, me in person and my parents on FaceTime, she's not DNR, save her. My dad's asking them to reverse what they did. My mom's saying, are you not helping our little girl because she has Down syndrome? In this battle, I swear it felt like 30 seconds, but it was a whole 7 minutes that went by because they called her death then at 7:27. So this battle in the hallway, there's 30 to 40 nurses. We can err on the side of caution and say 30, but they're in that hallway and everybody is standing stationary. No one's even moving a foot to do anything. So much evil in their eyes when I look at it. the head nurse tells this other nurse, Joe, now to call it, which I didn't even know what call it meant at the time. I know what call it means now. She said, call it Graces with Jesus. And I can just picture all the evil, and I cannot grasp that no one came in that room. And I'm asking them now to do CPR on her. I said I would do it myself, but I haven't done it in a long time. I said, you all are trained to do this. And in my mind, if she is to be saved, I'm in a hospital setting. They're going to be the ones to save her, not me. No one would do CPR. No one would do anything. So they called her death then at 7:27. And I went and I laid with Grace until my mom got there. And I asked to leave the BiPAP mask on her. And the other thing I forgot to add was there's an armed guard out in the hallway now when I was trying to get help. And Holly vanished. She's nowhere to be found. She just left. Anyways, I laid with Grace then and left the BiPAP mask on her. And this armed guard stood outside the nurse's window and watched me for at least 20 minutes. And we found out that there was a window of time after someone is pronounced dead that they can still be revived and given the reversal drug. So when I look at it now, I believe that is why that armed guard was there, to make sure no one that had a heart would come in and help her. Grace was special. They didn't look at her that way. It's hard to relive it every day. I know I didn't kill her. It wasn't me, it was them. But to be in those final moments, not being able to help her and save her, yes, I beat myself up a lot. Because I was the final person in that room, and I have to live with that. And I feel so stupid because when she was getting cold and I believed Holly that this is normal. How could I believe that? I've never witnessed somebody die though. I don't know. I know now that they go super cold. But I mean, I believed her. And I look back now, it was so stupid. I put way too much trust in them.
She would always write these beautiful notes. She's got this beautiful color picture that she did by hand, and then she's got a note to me. Dad's job is to protect Grace. And you know, when I put all the onus on me, I just, oh gosh, I wish I did a better job.
I was hoping that some of these nurses in this hospital would have a conscience, would have a heart, and would come forward and say what was really going on in those walls.